Within the four seas, all men are brothers. That's what Confucius said. But also, that phrase was used in Outlaws of the Marsh. And that phrase is the base of Outlaws of the Marsh. But what is Outlaws of the Marsh? It's a Chinese novel, and one of the four classic Chinese great novels, that known as Gudian Xiaoshuo. In fact, that was the first one in the list of four. The others are Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Journey to the West, and The Dream of Red Chamber. But what is Outlaws of the Marsh actually? Or what's it about? Well, if you're not familiar with it, you can take it this way. It's a hybrid between the story of Robin Hood, that the main characters are outlaws becoming bandits, mixed with the Sopranos, that they use their money in their own business and dirty deeds instead of giving it to the poor. As for the number of the characters, it's almost like Homer's Iliad, 108 characters, with the element of DC or Marvel Universe, where every hero has his own superpowers and skills, added the goriness of HBO TV series Rome, because that novel is the most gory and the most immoral of Chinese novels, added some elements of magic and brotherhood from Lord of the Rings, with some unexpected twists and hot pursuit, just like Red Dead Redemption or Grand Theft Auto, and it takes place in China during the Song Dynasty, which is the most influential dynasty in many Chinese novels, such as Legend of the Condor Heroes. Oh, and speaking about this novel, Outlaws of the Marsh was also the first novel that set the stage for the wuxia category, so we can call this novel the ancestor of the wuxia novels. But really, why is this introduction so necessary? The reason because I want to give you an idea of what's this novel about, if it suits you or not. Millions or over a billion people in China, even if they haven't read the novel, still, at least they're familiar with some of its characters and some of its events. So I'm reading the whole novel as a fan base to entertain millions of people who speak English that they barely know such amazing work exists. Truth can be told, I myself didn't know it as a novel in the beginning. I've watched it as a Japanese TV show that was originally aired in 1973 in Japan, dubbed to English in the UK, and watched it when I used to live in Middle East in 1989 or so. I still remember my parents, they let me sit and watch it with them. Hopefully that makes me go sleepy and go to sleep early so I can wake up early next morning for the kindergarten. Even though I didn't understand a thing, since I couldn't speak English back in the days and couldn't read and write. That's why I couldn't read the subtitles. Despite of all, it didn't help me to go to sleep because it was too much for a little kid to watch. But I started loving it and rewatched it again when I grew up a little bit. Then I watched the 1998 series, which was made by Chinese, a little bit bloodier than the Japanese version, but it was kind of tragic in comparison with the Japanese. And then I've read the novel, which was way gorier than the TV shows. The Japanese version itself is like a Disney version of a tragic story. Always happy ending. Well, not that happy ending. Disney happy endings. You know what I'm talking about. To understand that book further, let's talk about the book itself. Even though the novel tells the story during the Song Dynasty, it was actually released in China during the Ming Dynasty. This novel was written in vernacular, not in classic Chinese. It soon became popular and part of Chinese culture. That this novel has monuments, art sculptings, art paintings, pop culture, opera performances, tourism places that mentioned in the novel, radio dramas, TV shows, movies, tea house storytellings, many versions of the novel, and many copies gone from a Chinese house to another Chinese house, generation to another generation. This novel has 3 versions. The earliest version is with the 100th chapter. There's another one summarized with 70 chapters. And one version that was released later is with 120 chapter. So the differences between them, the enjoyable actions are all the same. The 70 chapter version ends in chapter 70 in the original 100 version, while the 120 version, 20 chapters were added later on. However, the ending was still the same like the 100 chapter version. As for the translations, the earliest English translation was translated by Pearl S. Buck. It was a translation of the 70 chapter version under the title All Men Are Brothers. It wasn't considered to be the best translation for twisting many things including the nicknames and deleting some of the supporting characters. The second well-known translation was by J.H. Jackson under the title Water Margin. The third and so far the best translation was the one by Sidney Shapiro, a Chinese naturalized American scholar who lived in China after serving in World War II. He lived really a long life. He died in 2014 at the age of 98. As for the novel, he translated the 70-chapter version mixed with the 100-chapter version. He translated it under the title Outlaws of the Marsh. It's missing the poems of the author, but everything else is there. So far is my favorite version, and also it's the version that I'm going to use to read it here. There's also a recent translation in 1994 by the brothers John and Alex Dent Young under the title The Marshes of Mount Liang, which was the translation of the 120-chapter version. It's a pretty good translation, but the 20 chapters are kind of like filler. Plus, it was added later, much later than the novel's release. Now let's talk about the original novel. The original title of the novel is Shoihu Juan, which means water margin, which also means marsh. As for Sidney Shapiro, his translation was under the title Outlaws of the Marsh. I guess because it is more attractive to Western readers, more than just marsh. The story takes place during the final decades of the Northern Song dynasty. After corruption started eating China inside out, the many characters in the novel, which their number is enormous, exactly 108 of all, they become outlaws. They revolt against the corrupt officials, taking the stronghold of Mount Liangshan as their headquarters. And of course, you already know, this mountain is surrounded by a marsh, and the novel is full of adventures. Each main character has his own. Now for the authorship of the novel, no one knows who's the real author of the novel. It was released during the Ming Dynasty, but there are many theories that says it was written during the Yuan Dynasty by a scholar named Xunai An. But there are no solid evidence that proves that Xunai An is the sole novelist who wrote the novel, or even if he does exist in the first place. So Xunai An might be just a pseudonym for an actual ghostwriter. There is another theory that says multiple writers they teamed up to write this novel under the pseudonym Xunai An, but that's the weakest theory. Another theory that the first 70 chapter was written by Xunai An and the rest was written by his student Lo Guanzhong, which he also edited the novel. If you don't know who Lo Guanzhong is, then you're missing a lot. Lo Guanzhong is the scholar that the writing of Romance of the Three Kingdoms was contributed to him, another great novel. In some copies of Outlaws of the Marsh, the author's names on it were of Xunai An and Lo Guanzhong. Another theory said that Lo Guanzhong is the one who wrote the book entirely. But still, it's just a theory. No solid evidence at all. But you might want to ask, why would somebody use pseudonym? Well, the answer lies in ancient China. Like we've mentioned, the book was written in vernacular. Any novel was written in vernacular back then was met by ridicule from other scholars, because they counted as a down level. But there's another reason. Not many people can mention how great was living in a previous dynasty, let alone showing bandits, murderers, criminals, thieves, and even a cannibalistic character as heroes that rebel against the government. Especially that the novel was written in vernacular. Everybody can understand it, just as a rebellion flyer. Besides, unlike any other Chinese novel, this one shows that the outlaws they get away with their crimes by bribing jailers, wardens, and prefects as well. So let's just say it's a bribing manual. Of course, all these things don't suit well with the government. That's why they would use a pseudonym. And of course, this is China. No opposition party whatsoever in its history, other than rebels, of course. This novel is the most successful novel in China, but it didn't stay inside the Chinese border. Some of the modern works were inspired by this novel. Like for example, Crying Freeman, a Japanese manga, another manga, Fist of the North Star. The manga JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, the Suikoden video game series. Suikoden is the title of Outlaws of the Marsh in Japan. We have the American animated TV show, Hero 108. The 1972 Hong Kong movie, The Water Margin. The 1973 Japanese TV show, Suikoden, which I discovered Outlaws of the Marsh with this TV show. The 1983 Chinese TV series, Outlaws of the Marsh, which I wish I can find it somehow. I've heard it's amazing. Then the 1998 Chinese TV show, The Water Margin, and the 2011 Chinese TV show, All Men Are Brothers. The last media was released was the movie of Wu Song, and there's many more. Despite of this novel was banned in China multiple times for making the outlaws heroes and its goriness. Also in the TV shows, They've lightened the level of goriness in it, such as the ways of killing. It's less tormenting, and also deleted the scenes of cannibalism. The last time this novel was banned was in China during the Cultural Revolution. That's why the Chinese were not the first ones who made the media about this novel. Now, let's talk about the novelist. As I said earlier, the most common theory about the author was a scholar whose name was Shunai An, but there's no proof that he exists in the first place. So take what I'm gonna tell with a grain of salt. He was born in the year 1296. He lived during the transmission between the Yuan dynasty and the Ming dynasty. Back in the days, China was a part of the Mongol Empire founded by Genghis Khan, and the one who invaded China was his son Kublai Khan. And during the Yuan dynasty, Marco Polo visited China. Shunai An was born to a poor family. His father's job was a boatman, so they couldn't send him to school, so they taught him at home. One day, he entered the imperial examination and passed the entry exam at the age of 19. Back then, whoever wanted to work in a governmental position, he has to pass several exams. And I'm not kidding if I'm going to say, back then in China, everybody wished these jobs for grifting and take some bribes. That's not a joke, of course. This is how they used to make money in China back in the days. At the age of 36, Shunai An has passed every exam. They gave him a job in county administration, but he only worked there for a couple of years, even after all this hard working, because his Mongol supervisors were giving him a hard time. He angrily resigned and opened a school in his house for teaching young scholars. It's been said that this was the time that he started writing Outlaws of the Marsh. And also, it was the same time that Lo Guanzhong became his student. Many decades later, an uprising broke against the Mongols, named the Red Turban Rebellion. As it was a multi-faction rebellion, Shunai An have joined one of the rebel factions for a short time as their strategist, but he had some creative differences with the rebels' leader, so he quit the insurgency and chose to wander around the country. 17 years from the rebellion, the Yuan dynasty was collapsed, the Mongols were defeated and expelled from China. After that, the rebel factions started fighting amongst themselves, until only one of them survived and established the Ming dynasty. And it's been said that during this time, Shunai An finished Outlaws of the Marsh and published it, and it became so popular quickly that it caught the attention of the emperor. After reading the novel, he didn't like it, since the main characters of the novel are outlaws that are rebelling against the government. The emperor thought that Shunai An wants to revolt against the government, so he threw Shunai An in prison. Eventually, they found out that he was innocent in less than 1 year. However, Shunai An's health was deteriorated. He couldn't even make it home. He was halfway there, and he had to stop in a village, which he stayed there for a year and then he died. And actually, this is the reason that you're gonna find out many Chinese novelists, they use pseudonym. There's actually another theory that says the emperor actually liked the novel and offered Shunai An a job as an official in the government, but Shunai An kept refusing. And this story doesn't mention anything about Shunai An being imprisoned. Another story says the novel was published after the death of Shunai An, but still, nothing to confirm. In 2011 in China, they found a literary prize called Shunai An Prize. And I guess that's what we know about Shunai An for now. Now, let's move to the characters. As I mentioned before, the novel has 108 characters. Each one of them has his own superpowers and skills, and for funny reason, they make an oath of brotherhood once they meet. In reality, you may know somebody in decades and you never make an oath of brotherhood with them. Anyway, let's continue. They always like to drink wine, they like feasts, generous, high sense of honor, well, they're gonna break that once in a while. They get angry so fast, draw their weapons quickly, and they start fighting. However, when it comes to romance and sex, they kinda prohibit themselves from it. And that's understandable. Back in the days in the Chinese novels, romantic novels are separate from action historical novels. One thing we should note about it, in this novel, our heroes are actually anti-heroes. Other than heroes in many Chinese novels back then, these heroes are not perfect. They might do many dirty deeds, and besides they happen to be outlaws, yet many of them are really lovable. And among those heroes, Songjiang, Lin Chong, Daizong, Wuyong, Lu Jushin, Javier, Wusong, and whoever you can't pronounce his name, so you come up with suitable names for them. So in the novel, they are a reincarnation of demons, 36 heavenly stars, and 72 earthly fiends. So the novel focuses more on the 36 heavenly stars, while the 72 earthly fiends are supporting characters. When I first introduce any character in the novel, if he's one of the 36, his name will be echoey with a thunder sound effect. For example, Songjiang. And when he's one of the 72 earthly fiends, his name also is going to be echoey with a rain sound effect. For example, Juwu. So this is how am I going to mention them. More dramatic. As for the names, I'm not going to use the names in the translation. Like for example, Sagacious Lu. Instead, I'm going to use the Chinese term, Lu Jushin, which has the same meaning of sagacious, but more authentic. Quick warning, in this novel, you might hear some bad words from here and there, so this novel is not suitable for children. And remember, the main characters are outlaws, not university professors. As for feminists, that novel is not for you because they treat women horribly in that novel, which is also understandable. This is the 13th century China, not 20th century Switzerland. As for the pictures I'm going to use in the videos, they are mostly of the 2011 TV series, and some from 1998 and the Japanese 1973. Now, let's talk about the last part, the era of the novel. It was believed that the novel was taking its inspiration from a book that was called The Events from Shunhe Era, which is during the reign of Emperor Huizong of the Song Dynasty. The events of the novel takes place in the last decades of the Northern Song Dynasty. We should note that Song Dynasty had two periods, the Northern Song Dynasty and the much weaker Southern Song Dynasty. The Song Dynasty as a whole lasted for over 3 centuries. It was much smaller than any other dynasty, but during this era, China was so prosperous, and it was the third great golden age in China after the Han and the Tang dynasties, of course. It was established after a military coup by Taizu, who overthrew Chao Shizong, who was the last emperor of the later Zhou during the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period. He managed to unite most of China in one entity. Some people considered the best imperial era to live in China was the Song dynasty, even though there was kind of an infighting against Western Xia, the kingdom of Liao, and the kingdom of Jin, the last remnants from the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms. However, the events of the novel takes after those, during the reign of the Huizong emperor. In the novel, he's been introduced by the name Duan, but those are not his real names. His real name was Zhaoji. He was the 11th son of the Emperor Shenzong and Emperor Jizong's younger brother. He wasn't supposed to be the emperor in the first place, but his brother Jizong died suddenly at the age of 23, without having a son. And another brother is supposed to be the emperor. But Zhaoji's mother was the Empress Dowager. She convinced the council to make Zhaoji the emperor. He became an emperor at the age of 18. Just like in the novel, he was known to be handsome, great in all forms of art, playing music, singing and dancing, choosing luxurious prostitutes. Anyway, playing suju, chess, and the best calligraphy in the country. Also the best painting in the country. But come to think of it, he's happened to be the emperor. So who's gonna say I'm better than you, right? Despite of having all these great compliments and accomplishments, when it comes to running a country, he was extremely lame. And thanks to him, things have been messed up during the Song dynasty that hastened the collapse of the Northern Song. Technically, he wasn't running the country. He gave the administration of the country entirely for his corrupt ministers, and that thing sparked many rebellions in the country. One of the rebel groups, led by a guy named Songjiang, which contains military officers and employees who worked with the government before, with scholars, farmers, fishermen, policemen, even Taoist priests. That rebel faction was actually the inspiration of Outlaws of the Marsh. Zhaoji, or later Huizong Emperor, abdicated in favor of his son, Qinzong, who ruled about a year, and thanks for his father's lousiness, things were messed up already. The Chinese army was so weak that they couldn't defend the capital Kaifeng against the invasion of the kingdom of Jin, that they sacked the capital Kaifeng, seizing Zhaoji and his son, which they lived the rest of their lives and died in the prisons of kingdom of Jin. And that's how the Northern Song dynasty was collapsed. As for the novel, it ends 5 years period to this event. So now I think we have some knowledge about the dynasty we're dealing with in the novel. And that's been said, it's time to go straight to the novel. It'll be one chapter at a time. Final note, there'll be a voice acting, loud yelling, and many sound effects in that novel. So please, do not use headphones when you listen to the novel. This is a safety warning. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Thank you so much everybody. I'll see you in the next video.